Welcome to Starbound. My name is Veronica and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please check below to see if you're subscribed to our channel. It's 100% free and just allows our stories to pop up on your feed more often. The morning air whispers through my chambers at a perfect -40 degrees, carrying crystalline notes of the city's awakening far below. I press my fingertips to the diamond pane window, watching my breath form delicate patterns on its surface. From this height, in the palace's northwest tower, I can see all of Glaspire spread before me like an architect's model rendered in ice and snow. The sun barely crests our world's distant horizon, casting long shadows across the city's sharp spires and angular thoroughfares. Even in these early hours, my people move with purpose through the streets, their silver white hair and pale blue skin making them seem like spirits drifting between the buildings. The early market crowds gather in the crown square, their voices carrying up to me in that distinctive way that sound travels in extreme cold, crisp and clean. Trade caravans from the southern provinces are already arriving through the frost gate, their repulsor sleds leaving no trace on the perfectly maintained streets. I smile at the familiar sight of the kingdom's commerce flowing beneath me. Merchants haggling over prices for everything, from processed stabulants to raw mercury ice. Father often says a busy market is the surest sign of a healthy realm. A group of children races past the gate guards, their laughter echoing off the crystalline walls. One trips and falls, but the others help them up immediately. There's no time to waste being still in our climate. I smile, remembering my own childhood games in these same streets, back when the weight of succession felt distant and abstract. The palace intercoms chime, marking the hour. Soon the morning court will begin, and with it the endless parade of petitioners and policy debates. I turn from the window, smoothing the front of my formal attire, an intricate arrangement of silk-thin ice fabric that flows like water while maintaining perfect thermal stability. The latest fashion among the nobility, though I prefer simpler styles. Father will expect me to attend today's Provincial's Representatives Forum. Since Mother's passing, he's worked tirelessly to maintain her legacy of open dialogue between the Crown and our people. The outer provinces have their concerns, of course. They always do. But Father's patient diplomacy has kept relations warm despite our naturally cold demeanors. A servant appeared at my door, right on schedule. "Your Highness, the morning court will begin shortly. Your father requests your presence." I nod, taking one last look at the city below. The spires catch the strengthening sunlight, refracting it into rainbow patterns across the streets. Beautiful, but also practical. The angles are precisely calculated to minimize heat absorption. Like everything in Halconian architecture, form follows function. Time to face another day of courtly duties. Though the politics can be tedious, I've come to appreciate Father's insistence that I attend these sessions. "A ruler must know their people," he always says. "Not just their problems, but their dreams." Mother would be proud of how he's kept the kingdom united through understanding rather than force. I leave my chambers, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the vaulted ceiling. The great hall ahead stretches like a frozen river, its surfaces reflecting the pale light filtering through strategic gaps in the architecture. Another day in the coldest capital in known space begins, though lately I've begun to wonder if the true chill comes not from our climate, but from our hearts. The Grand Court Chamber never fails to take my breath away, even after all these years. Massive crystal columns rise like frozen waterfalls to support a vaulted ceiling designed to amplify sound perfectly throughout the space. Father sits upon the frost throne, a masterwork of perpetually shifting ice that responds to the sovereign's touch, marking the seat of our dynasty's power for over 8 centuries. Today's petitioners fill the chamber in their formal attire, creating a sea of silver and pale blue that ripples with each movement. Minister Solreth presents today's agenda in his characteristic whisper soft tone. Trade negotiations with the mining colonies of Nexus 9, proposals for a new thermal regulation infrastructure in the western districts, debates over modernizing our education protocols. The delegation from Crystal Point Province, Minister Silreth announces, and a group of provincial leaders approaches the throne. Their spokesperson, a sharp-featured woman named Aureline, presents their case for additional resources to expand their archaeological research facilities. We've discovered evidence of pre-colonization structures beneath the glacial shelf, Arlene explains, her voice carrying that distinctive accent of the northern reaches. The potential historical value. The explosion tears through her words like a hammer through glass. I'm thrown backwards as superheated gas floods the chamber, creating a fog of flash vaporized ice. Screams pierce the air, some cut horrifyingly short. Through the chaos, I see Father being rushed to safety by his guards, their movement precise despite the panic. My back hits something solid, a wall, I think, and for a moment, I can't breathe. The thermal shock leaves me disoriented, and my people aren't made for such sudden temperature changes. Through the swirling vapor, a dark figure emerges. Tall, unnaturally so, its outline wrong in ways I can't process through the haze of impact. The assassin moves with impossible speed, closing the distance before I can even try to stand. I catch a glimpse of something artificial about their frame, some kind of exoskeleton perhaps, before the blade flashes towards my throat. Pure instinct saves me, and my hand rising as I call upon my birthright. A spear of ice manifests between us, catching my attacker mid-lunge. But I'm not fast enough to avoid the blade entirely. Fire erupts across my neck, where it nicks the skin, a burning beyond anything I've ever felt. The assassin's body slices limply down the ice spear, but I barely notice. The burning spreads rapidly from the cut, and darkness creeps at the edges of my vision. The last thing I see before consciousness fades is my own blood dripping onto the floor. Not the proper pale blue of Halsonian nobility, but something darker, tainted. As my mind slips away, I hear Father screaming my name, his voice carrying a note of desperation I'd not heard since Mother passed. Everything burns. Consciousness comes in waves, each bringing fragments of sensation. Voices argue somewhere distant, their words disoriented as if traveled through deep ice. The air feels wrong, too warm, then too cold, never settling. My throat burns with each breath, like swallowing shards of heated metal. Neutralize the compound, but the damage. Neural pathways severely compromised. Telling His Majesty. I try to focus on the voices, but they slip away like fish beneath frozen water. Time loses meaning. Sometimes, I think I feel Father's presence, his normally steady hands trembling as they clutch mine. Other times, I'm certain I hear Mother singing my childhood lullabies, though that must be a delirium. When I finally surface fully, the first thing I notice is the silence. Not the comfortable quiet of a winter morning, but something hollow, empty. The medical chamber's walls are bare crystal, lacking the usual decorative ice patterns that mark Halsonian architecture. Even in my weakened state, I should be able to feel the ice, to sense its potential for sharpening. But there's nothing. Your Highness. A soft voice breaks the silence. Dr. Virial stands beside my bed, his usual pristine white coat showing signs of long wear. Dark circles beneath his eyes suggest he wasn't resting in some time. How are you feeling? Like I swallowed a star, I manage, my voice barely a whisper. What happened? He hesitates, just for a moment, but long enough for dread to settle in my stomach. The blade was coated with a compound we've never encountered before. Some kind of targeted neurotoxin. We managed to neutralize it before it could. He trails off, apparently thinking better of completing that thought. Before it could kill me, I finish for him, and the words taste bitter, but... Dr. Varel's professional demeanor cracks slightly. The toxin. It appears to have damaged the neural pathways that allow you to interface with ice formations. We've run every test we can think of, tried every treatment in our archives, but he takes a deep breath. The damage appears to be permanent. The words hit harder than the assassin's blade. I raise my hand, reaching for that familiar connection to the ice around me. There's nothing. No response. No subtle shifts in the crystals. No hint of that power that has been a part of me since birth. Does Father know? I ask, though I already suspect the answer from the doctor's expression. Yes, he's... Dr. Varel seems to choose his next words carefully. He's taking it rather hard. The guards had to physically remove him from the medical wing when he began demanding increasingly dangerous experimental treatments. I close my eyes, remembering Father's voice during my delirium. The fear there, the desperation, just like when Mother... The official story, Dr. Varel continues quietly, is that you're still recovering from the assassination attempt. Only myself, your father, and Minister Silreth know the full extent of your condition. Condition. Such a clinical word for having part of your soul carved out. Thank you, Doctor. I say, surprised by how steady my voice sounds. I'd like to rest now. He nods and withdraws, leaving me alone with the silence. Without my powers, I can't even feel the subtle vibrations of his footsteps through the ice floor. Another small death I hadn't known to mourn until this very moment. I stare at my hands, remembering all the times I've shaped ice as naturally as breathing. The delicate sculptures I used to make to help Mother smile during her final days. The protective barriers I could raise in an instant. The connection to my heritage, my birthright, my very identity as heir to the mercurial throne. All gone. Because I wasn't fast enough, strong enough. A single tear rolls down my cheek and freezes instantly. At least my body temperature is still properly Halconian, even if everything else about me is broken. Dawn brings no comfort anymore. I stand at my window as I have countless mornings before, but the view feels distant, disconnected. The ice crystal panes no longer sing beneath my touch. The intricate frost patterns that once danced to my will remain stubbornly static. It's like watching a reflection in darkened glass. I can see everything, but can't reach through to touch it. The silence presses in around me. I never realized how much of our world's music came from the subtle manipulations of ice. The crystal harmonics that accompanied every Halconian movement. The whisper songs of frost forming in the air. Without my powers, it's all just cold. A knock on my chamber door breaks through my brooding. Enter, I call out, but not turning from the window. Your Highness. It's Marina, one of my more diplomatic handmaidens. Her tone carries that careful neutrality that everyone seems to use around me lately. Your father has sent someone to assist with your security. That gets my attention. What do you mean, assist? I turn to face her, noting how she seems unusually tense. The palace guards. A specialist, Your Highness, from off-world. Before I can demand clarification, a wave of warmth hits me, subtle at first, then increasingly noticeable. It's like standing too close to an active engine, that radiation of heat that makes Halconians instinctively step back. But this is coming from the corridor outside my chambers. Your Highness, Marina's voice carries a note of warning. Please don't be alarmed. Your father was very specific about... The source of heat enters my chamber, and for a moment, I forget how to breathe. He's massive, not just tall, but built on a scale that makes even our palace guards look delicate. Layers of insulated armor cover him from head to toe, clearly designed to contain the inferno of his natural body heat. A transparent faceplate reveals features that are almost Halconian in their arrangement, but colored in impossibly warm tones. Skin like sun-touched bronze, eyes a deep brown that remind me of an ancient wood preserved in our museum. A human. We learned about them in my exobiology studies. A species that burns so hot they can melt standard ice with a touch, whose very breath carries enough heat to fog our crystal windows. And now is standing in my chambers, close enough that I can feel the temperature difference disrupting my perfectly maintained climate. Princess Lyrelis. His voice is surprisingly soft, despite its depth, muffled slightly by his environmental suit. I'm James Ear. Your father has contracted me to ensure your safety. I want to protest, to demand an explanation, to ask my father what he's thinking bringing something so dangerous in our carefully regulated world. But there's something in the human's steady gaze that stops me. Not warmth, despite his temperature, his eyes are coolly professionally. But something else, something that speaks of capability, of absolute dedication to duty. I don't recall asking for protection. I manage, trying to sound appropriately regal despite my discomfort. You didn't have to, Your Highness. No change in his tone, no reaction to my attempted dismissal. I've been fully briefed on the situation and the unique challenges of operating in your environment. I assure you, I won't interfere with your daily routine any more than absolutely necessary. The way he says situation makes me wonder just how much he's been told. Does he know about my lost powers? About how vulnerable I truly am? The thought makes me want to create an ice wall between us. A reflection that dies stillborn. Another reminder of what I've lost. Very well, I say, because what other choice do I have? I suppose you'd better be coming along then. I have duties to attend to. He inclines his head slightly, a gesture that manages to be both respectful and somehow non-committal, and steps aside to let me pass. As I move past him, I'm acutely aware of the heat radiating from his suit. It's not uncomfortable, exactly, but it's distracting, like standing next to a star that's learned to walk. What was Father thinking, bringing fire into our world of ice? The layers of cold weather gear are a necessary burden, but that doesn't make them any less restrictive. Each thermal jacket, insulated panel, and reinforced layer adds weight and limits mobility. The balaclava and snow goggles protect my face from the bitter cold, while my breath constantly fogs the transparent barrier. Discomfort is part of the job, though, and this particular job pays better than any contract I've taken in 15 years of protection work. The shuttle's display shows external temperature dropping steadily as we descend through Halcyon's atmosphere. -20 degrees Celsius. -30. The numbers settle around -40, harsh enough to kill an unprotected human in minutes, but nothing my Arctic gear can't handle. Even through the shuttle's shielding, I can feel the cold trying to reach in. We are so grateful you accepted this contract. King Skyreth's voice carries a frantic edge that sets off warning bells in my mind. I've protected enough dignitaries to recognize a tone of someone barely holding themselves together. After the attempt on my daughter's life, I couldn't bear. He trails off, staring through the shuttle's viewports at his ice palace below. I've seen images of Halcyonian's architecture, but they do not do justice to the real thing. The entire structure seems to defy gravity, towers of perfectly clear ice spiraling up into the pale sky. Beautiful if you can ignore how quickly it could kill you. Your Majesty? I keep my voice neutral, professional. I understand your concerns. My record speaks for itself. No one under my protection has ever come to harm. The king's face shifts, an expression I can't quite read through the differences in Halcyonian facial structures. Yes, of course. Your reputation is impressive. Though, I must ask, you're certain your gear can handle our environment? The temperature difference between your species and ours? This equipment is rated for Earth's harshest polar conditions, I assure him. and I've worked in extreme environments before. The challenges has been accounted for. He seems to accept this, though his hands keep whirring at the edges of his formal robes. The shuttle touches down in a private hangar, and the palace staff immediately begin fussing over their king. I take the moment to check my gear one final time. Everything seems secure, but experience has taught me to trust redundancy over confidence. The walk to the princess's chambers is an exercise in environmental awareness. Every surface radiates a bone-deep cold that seeps through even my specialized clothing. The Halconian guards we pass eye me with mixed curiosity and concern. I must look bizarrely overdressed to being adapted to these temperatures. Then the princess's chamber door opens, and all my careful environmental calculations falter. The briefing included images, of course, physical descriptions, biographical data, everything a professional bodyguard needs to know about their charge. None of it prepares me for reality. She stands at the window like a figure carved from living ice, silver white hair catching the pale sunlight. When she turns, her eyes are the impossible blue of glacier depths. Professional. Remember to be professional. I deliver my practice introduction, keeping my voice steady, despite the way her presence seems to fill the space. Behind my balaclava and goggles, I allow myself a moment to appreciate the elegant lines of her features, the grace of her movements. Then I lock those observations away with all the other things that don't matter to the job. She's resistant to the idea of protection. They usually are. I give her my standard assurances about minimal interference, all while cataloging potential threats in her chamber. 3 windows, 2 doors, multiple decorative ice formations that could be used as weapons. The structural analysis helps ground me, pulls me back to the practical concerns that have kept me alive in this line of work. As she moves past me to exit the chamber, I definitely don't notice the way her hair catches the light, or how her movements carry an inherent dignity that has nothing to do with her royal status. Those details aren't relevant to her security. I adjust my position to follow at optimal protection distance, focusing on the job. Just another contract, I tell myself. Just another client to keep alive. I almost believe it. The human maintains a precise distance as we walk, close enough to react to threats, yet far enough that his body heat merely warms the air rather than disrupts it. Even through layers of insulated clothing, he radiates warmth like a shielded reactor. The sensation is not entirely unpleasant, though I'd never admit that out loud. The court will be different today, I warn him, watching his reflections in the ice crystal walls. His goggles and face covering make his expressions impossible to read, but I notice how his head turns slightly to track every movement, every potential angle of approach. The damage from the attack has been repaired, he finishes, voice muffled by the balaclava, though not all of it by traditional means. Your ice shapers worked through the night, but standard construction crews handle the structural elements. I saw it on the way in. Of course, he's already studied the changes. I wonder what else he's observed in the short time since his arrival. Those dark eyes behind the goggles seem to miss nothing, cataloging details I've long since stopped noticing. The great doors to the court chamber loomed ahead, their surface freshly repaired, but lacking the intricate patterns that once decorated them. Inside, the difference is even more stark. Where delicate ice sculptures once lined the walls, sturdy columns now stand. The vaulted ceiling has been reinforced with metal support beams, a jarring sight in a Halconian palace. Father sits upon the mercurial throne, but something about his posture seems wrong, tense. His eyes snap to me as I enter, then immediately to James. For a moment, something like pain crosses his features before he masters it. Lyra Louise, he greets me, voice carrying none of its usual warmth. I trust your new security arrangement is satisfactory? It's certainly thorough, I reply diplomatically. James shifts slightly behind me, adjusting his position to better view the entire chamber, I realize. Always working, always watching. The day's petitioners seem uncertain how to react to the human's presence. Some eye him with obvious concern, while others pointedly pretend not to notice him at all. The provincial representatives who survived the attack are conspicuously absent. Mr. Silthreth begins the proceedings, his voice lacking its usual musical quality. Every proposal seems to circle around security now, reinforcing buildings, increasing patrols, implementing new screening procedures. Father approves each measure without discussion, his expression growing harder with each proclamation. The warmth at my back remains steady, grounding. James hasn't moved, hasn't spoken, but his presence fills the space in a way that's difficult to ignore. Occasionally, his breath fogs in the cold air, creating brief clouds that scatter the light. The effect reminds me of the frost patterns I can no longer create. A brief commotion draws my attention. One of the petitioners have moved too quickly, causing the guards to tense. But before they can react, James has already shifted his stance. Nothing dramatic, just a subtle adjustment that nevertheless makes it clear he's ready to respond to any threat. The petitioner must sense it too, because they immediately slow their movements. Perhaps, Father's voice cuts through the tension. We should implement mandatory escorts for all visitors to the palace, for their protection, of course. I want to object, to point out how such restrictions will only create more discord. But the words die in my throat. Without my powers, what right do I have to speak about protection? A whisper of warm air brushes my neck as James adjusts his position again. For a moment, I imagine I can feel his gaze on me, assessing my reaction. But then I glance back, those dark eyes are focused on scanning the chamber, ever vigilant. Your Majesty, Minister Silthreth begins, the logistics of such a policy will be sorted out, Father interrupts. I won't risk another attack, not on my people, not on my daughter. The chamber falls silent. Even the usual crystalline resonance of the ice walls seems muted, as if the palace itself holds its breath. In that silence, I'm acutely aware of James' presence, of the steady rhythm of his breathing, of the subtle warmth that seems to reach past my natural resistance to heat. The rest of the session passes in a blur of security measures and restrictions. I barely register the details, too distracted by the growing knot of worry in my stomach. This isn't like Father. This isn't like our people. We're becoming something harder, colder, but not in our usual way. The second explosion comes from above. One moment, I'm listening to another security proposal. The next, a reinforced ceiling shatters in a cascade of ice and metal. My muscles lock up at the sound, memories of the first attack paralyzing me. But where my powers once would have instinctively created a shield, now there's only emptiness. I barely register movement before James is there, one arm sweeping me behind a column, while his other hand draws a weapon I hadn't even realized he was carrying. Multiple figures drop through the breach, their forms distorted by some kind of active camouflage. Stay behind me, James orders, his voice sharp with command. The chamber erupts into chaos as palace guards rush to defend against intruders. But these attackers are clearly better prepared than the first. They move with military precision, using some kind of energy weapons that slice through ice and armor alike. A thrown dagger flashes towards us. James catches it mid-flight with his gloved hand, the blade skittering off his reinforced palm. In the same fluid motion, he returns fire, his shot finding a gap in one attacker's stealth field. The figure drops with eerie silence. More assassins converge on our position. James meets them with efficiency of motion I didn't think was possible in such a heavy winter gear. Each movement is precise, calculated. No energy wasted despite the restrictive clothing. One attacker gets close enough that I can see their face behind the stealth mask. Their eyes widen at something behind me. Down! James shouts. I drop just as he fires over my head, catching this assassin trying to flank us. The shot disrupts their stealth field, revealing armor similar to what the first attacker wore. A stray energy blast catches James in the shoulder, shearing through his outer layers of winter gear. I catch a glimpse of what looks like standard body armor beneath, but more importantly, I see exposed skin upon a broad shoulder. At these temperatures, even a small tear in this protective clothing could be lethal for most species. But he doesn't even flinch. If anything, the injury just makes him more focused. An assassin charges with some kind of vibro blade. James catches their wrist, redirects their momentum, and sends them crashing into two of their companions, all while keeping himself between me and any potential threat. 9 hostiles remaining, he reports, as if giving a standard status update. Your Highness, we need to... Another explosion rocks the chamber. This one feels different, more focused, more precise. Through the smoke and ice fragments, I see a familiar canister rolling towards us. The same kind they used in the first attack. Time seems to slow. I see James's head churn, tracking the device. See his body tense as he prepares to shield me. See the exposed skin where his winter gear was damaged, already showing signs of frostbite. The grenade detonates. James moves faster than I thought possible, wrapping himself around me as superheated gas floods the chamber. His winter gear takes the brunt of it, but I hear fabric tear, feel the sudden shock of human body heat as more of his protective layers are compromised. We hit the ground together, his larger frame completely covering mine. For a fraction of a second, I'm overwhelmingly aware of the temperature difference between us. His skin radiates heat like a furnace, almost painful where it nears mine. But he's already moving again, rolling us behind better cover as return fire from the palace guards finally begins to drive the attackers back. VIP is secure, James calls out, his voice carrying that same professional calm despite his increasingly precarious situation. More of his winter gear has been damaged or torn away, leaving his arms and parts of his chest exposed to the killing cold. Yet he maintains his defensive position, weapon tracking multiple targets while keeping me protected. The remaining assassins seem to realize they've lost their advantage. They retreat with the same precision they attacked with, using more grenades to cover their escape. The palace guards pursue, but I already know they won't catch them. Are you hurt? James asks, still scanning for threats despite the obvious pain he must be in from the cold. I'm fine, I manage, unable to look away from where frost is already forming on his exposed skin, though embarrassingly not because of the danger it implies. But you... We'll manage, he cuts me off, voice professional despite his shivering. We need to get you to a secure location. Can you walk? I nod, trying not to think about how he'd carried me without hesitation, how naturally he'd put himself between me and danger, how much of his own safety he'd sacrificed for mine. As we move through the ruined chamber, I notice he's adjusted his remaining winter gear to prioritize coverage of his vital organs. Even injured, even freezing, he's thinking tactically. Guards fall in around us, but I find myself watching him instead of them. The way he maintains awareness of every angle despite his condition. The controlled precision of his movements even through obvious pain. The way his bronze skin glistens in the reflecting light of the chamber. How his arms and chest ripple with muscles far beyond anything my people could develop. Medical team is standing by, one of the guards reports. James just nods, never taking his eyes off our surroundings. Even with parts of him literally freezing, he's still focused entirely on his duty. What kind of person, I wonder, can burn so hot, yet remain so coldly professional? 3 weeks have passed since the second attack. I barely recognize the palace anymore. The delicate ice archways have been replaced with reinforced barriers. Armed guards patrol every corridor. The once welcoming court chamber has been transformed into what Father calls a secure audience facility. a phrase that feels as cold as our world. The outer provinces must understand, Father declares from his newly fortified throne. These measures are for their protection. I should be paying attention to these proceedings. Should be concerned about how fathers ordered the closure of 3 major trade routes, citing security risks. Should worry about the whispers of unrest growing in the distant settlements. Instead, my thoughts keep drifting to the steady presence at my back. James has been issued new winter gear, even more heavily armored than before. Yet somehow he moves with the same fluid grace, maintaining that precise distance that's just close enough for me to feel his warmth. I've caught myself watching his reflection in the ice walls more times than I care to admit, studying the way he carries himself with such controlled power. Furthermore, Minister Solreth announces, though his voice has lost all its musical qualities, we are implementing mandatory identification protocols for all non-essential personnel. Anyone unable to provide proper credentials will be detained for questioning. A murmur of discontent ripples through the assembled petitioners. Father silences it with a sharp gesture, ice cracking beneath his fingers on the throne's arm. The display of power makes me acutely aware of my own loss. Except, something feels different today. There's an odd sensation I can't quite place. A subtle change in the air, perhaps? After losing my powers, I've become hyper-aware of every minor shift in my environment, desperate for any hint of my old connection to the ice. But this feeling is unlike anything I've ever experienced before. Your Highness. James's voice is pitched low, meant only for me. Are you all right? Yes, I start to respond, but Father's voice drowns me out. The penalties for non-compliance will be severe, he announces. We cannot afford weakness, cannot risk another attack on our people, our way of life. His eyes fix on me, on our family. More declarations follow, even harsher than the last. Increased surveillance in public spaces, restricted movement between districts, mandatory reporting of suspicious activities. The halcyon I knew feels like it's vanishing between glacier layers of security and suspicion. During a brief recess, I find myself pacing restlessly, trying to understand this new awareness. My movement brings me alternately closer to and further from where James stands guard. But I'm too distracted by my own tumultuous thoughts to maintain proper royal composure. The trade representatives from the southern provinces, James murmurs, professional as always despite my obvious distraction, they're displaying signs of agitation. He's right, of course. The southern delegates huddle together, their postures radiating tension. One of them keeps reaching for something beneath their robes. James has already adjusted his position, ready to respond to any threat. I should warn Father about the delegates' behavior, should focus on the growing political crisis. Instead, I find myself wondering what would happen if I moved just a little closer to my guard. Would my powers return more strongly? Would I feel that rush of warmth again, like during the attack when he'd held me against the blast? Princess? James' voice cuts through my inappropriate thoughts. Your father is watching. Indeed he is, his expression unreadable. I force myself to focus on the proceedings, on the increasingly draconian measures being passed without debate or discussion. But my awareness of James remains, like standing near an open flame, dangerous, yet somehow impossible to move away from. Something is changing in the palace, in my father, in me. I'm not sure what disturbs me more, the transformation of our once peaceful kingdom into a fortress, or the way my thoughts keep drifting to the human guard who seems to have become the only stable element in my increasingly unstable world. I pace my chambers like a caged frost cat, that strange sensation from earlier now impossible to ignore. Something about my powers feels different. Not gone, not anymore, but unstable. One moment I can almost feel the ice singing to me again, then nothing but silence. This makes no sense, I mutter, running through every recent events in my mind. The doctor's prognosis, the careful monitoring of my recovery, the subtle shifts in my awareness over the past few weeks. There has to be a pattern I'm missing. A knock at my door interrupts my brooding. Enter. Pardon the interruption, Your Highness. A servant bows. Your guard has requested a brief leave to attend to personal needs. A temporary replacement has been arranged. Of course, even James has to take breaks occasionally. I wave permission, barely paying attention as he exits and another guard takes his position outside my door. My mind is too focused on trying to understand what's happening to my abilities. I reach out with my senses, trying to connect with the ice as I have thousands of times before. For a moment, I feel it, that familiar resonance, the potential for shaping and control. Then it slips away again, leaving me frustrated and confused. The pattern continues for several minutes. Reach, connect, lose, repeat. Each failure chips away at my composure until I want to scream. Instead, I force myself to think logically. When did this start? What's different about today compared to... The sensation vanishes completely. I freeze mid-pace, the sudden absence striking me like a physical blow. What changed? What triggered... James. James just left for his break. The realization hits me with such force that I have to sit down. Scrambling through memories, I track the pattern. The strange awareness that started when he arrived. The fluctuations as he moved around during guard duty. The complete loss of connection when he is gone. Impossible, I whisper, but as soon as the word leaves my lips, I feel it again. The whisper of power growing stronger. I turn to find James has returned to his post, the temporary guard already departing. My heart races as implications cascade through my mind. All this time, I've been focusing on recovering my powers as they were, never considering they might have changed, that they might now be tied to what? To humans? To James specifically? To the heat he radiates? The possibilities spiral out, each more incredible than the last. I need to test this. I need to be sure. But how? I can hardly ask my personal guard to participate in experiments about his effect on my abilities. The very idea is absurd, not to mention potentially dangerous. If word got out that my powers were somehow dependent on proximity to a human, and yet, I rise from my seat, drawn towards the door almost against my will. The closer I get to where James stands guard, the stronger the sensation becomes. Not just the awareness of ice now, but something more. Something that makes my pulse quicken and my skin tingle in ways that have nothing to do with temperature. This is madness. I'm a princess of Halcyon. He's a human, a guard, literally dangerous for me to touch. I should back away, should think this through, should consider the political implications. Instead, I find myself reaching for the door handle. Your Highness? James's voice carries that same professional tone, giving no hint whether he's noticed my increasingly erratic behavior today. Words fail me. How do I even begin to explain? I think you're somehow restoring my powers. Sounds insane. I need to get closer to you to test a theory. Sounds inappropriate at best, scandalous at worst. But I've spent weeks watching my kingdom turn to frozen steel around me. Weeks feeling helpless as Father's fear reshapes our world. Weeks wondering if I'll ever be whole again. I am done wondering. My hand closes on the door handle. Whatever happens next will change everything. But to be fair, everything has already changed. What's one more? Maintain position. Scan for threats. Monitor entry points. Professional routine helps me ignore the growing tension in Princess Lyraris's movements. Over the past hour, her pacing has become increasingly erratic, each pass bringing her closer to my post at the door. I keep my gaze fixed ahead, even as every instinct tracks her motion. Something's different today. She's been distracted, unsettled. The signs are subtle: a slight tremor in her hands, quick glances in my direction when she thinks I'm not watching, moments where she seems to forget her royal composure entirely. Any one of these could indicate a security risk. That's the only reason I'm paying such close attention. The only reason I can't stop noticing the way pale light plays across her silver hair, or how her eyes seem to catch fire when lost in thought. Professional. Stay professional. I run through my mental checklist again. Corridor clear. Windows secure. Temperature holding steady at -40, cold enough to kill me in minutes, as usual. The gear that suddenly feels too restrictive, too warm, as footsteps approach the door from inside the chamber. The handle turns. I maintain my position, though every nerve ending seems to fire at once. The princess has been watching me all day. I felt her eyes studying me with an intensity that has nothing to do with standard guard charge dynamics. But acknowledging it would be unprofessional, dangerous. Your Highness. I keep my voice neutral as she appears in the doorway. She's closer than protocol dictates, close enough that I can see the subtle blue undertones in her pale skin, can track the rapid pulse at her throat. Stay professional. Remember the contract. James? My name in her voice sends a shiver down my spine that has nothing to do with the cold. I need to, test something. Warning signals flash in my mind. The way she's looking at me. Not as a guard, not as a human, but as something else entirely. Something that makes it very hard to remember all the reasons this is a terrible idea. Your Highness, I'm not sure. She moves with surprising speed. Before I can react, before I can remind myself of protocols and propriety and the 1,000 reasons this can't happen, her hand catches my winter coat. One sharp tug is all it takes to pull me into her chambers. I should resist, should maintain professional distance, should remember that my body temperature could literally harm her. Instead, I find myself following her momentum, letting her pull me further inside. The door clicks shut behind us with a sound like sealing fate. This is... I try again, but she cuts me off. Inappropriate, dangerous, politically disastrous. Her smile carries an edge of reckless determination. I know, but there's something I need to know for certain, and you're the only one who can help me discover it. She's close now, too close. My training screams at me to back away, to restore proper distance. But 15 years of professional detachment crumble in the face of her proximity, of the way she looks at me like I'm more than just hired protection, like I matter. Princess, a warning, a plea. I'm not even sure anymore. My temperature might be exactly what I need. Her hand releases my coat, only to catch the fabric of my sleeve. The motion draws me another step closer, until I can feel the cool radiance of her presence cutting through my layers of insulation. Until the space between us holds nothing but possibility and danger in equal measure. Professional. I need to stay professional. I need to remember my duty, my contract, my... She pulls me down onto the bed, and my thoughts scatter like snow in a storm.